Thank you to our sponsor for Season 2, Punto Space. The contemporary raw space combines capacity with intimacy. 4 distinct spaces on 3 levels encompass more than 3,500 square feet. Custom configurations, a state-of-the-art audio-visual system, and full-service support provide endless possibilities for realizing your creative vision. Welcome to Currency Shift, the podcast where we showcase and share insights from first, only, and the disruptive. These are people who are creating new lanes and carving new paths for women, people of color, and diversity and inclusion. My name is Taitt Simmone. Let's get started. All right, we have Simmone Taitt in the house.
Hey, so excited to be here.
Yes, I'm glad you're here as well. Let's cheers.
Cheers.
Yes, let's see what this tastes like.
Oh, yum. Oh, that's so refreshing.
Oh, wow, I made a great drink.
Yes. As we ease into spring. I mean, we are easing into it, right?
It's taking so long, but today feels so great outside.
It does.
So, Miss Taitt, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Okay, well, I'm actually born and raised in New England. First generation immigrant. So my mom, my parents came here from Jamaica. My mom's Jamaican, my father's Indian. And the man that raised me, I always put this in there, the man that I call daddy, he is actually from the South. So I had lots of, mixing of cultural heritage and also food, in my household. But I grew up in Massachusetts, in a town called Springfield, Massachusetts. Most people know Springfield for the Basketball Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. Dr. Seuss is also from Springfield. And, I have pretty deep New England roots now because I was the only one born there in my family. I have an older brother and sister. I went to school there. I went to church there. But when I left Springfield to go to college, and I'm a proud graduate of Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania, I actually didn't go back to Springfield to live. I was creating my own path and going on my own adventures and my own journey. So, but my mom still lives in Massachusetts.
Okay.
So I do get back there to see her.
And what do you do professionally?
Yeah, sure. So, for a long time, I could answer this in really just 2 words, right? I'm in tech startups. And that is true. So for about 15 years, I was building tech startups and really on the sales side. Mm-hmm. And I know that we'll probably get into some of, what that looks like when you're going into a company, especially a tech startup that's, just raised a seed or a strong Series A, yes. But always on the sales side. And I got bit by the bug pretty early on before it was cool in New York. Mm-hmm. Startup wasn't this buzzy word. For my family, it just meant you're leaving a Fortune 500 company for what? What's the name of the company? And so that's my specialty. That's what I've been doing. But about a little over a year ago, I actually launched my own boutique agency here in New York called Heart Space NY. Okay. And what I usually do for, one company, my team and I are able to do and really be impactful with several companies now in a year. All tech sales, all tech startups. We really focus on sales operations, high growth companies who are looking to break revenue barriers, but also really take a very close look at their process, at how to make things more efficient, how to stay in, philosophically anyway, the lean startup mode while also growing. Getting them through, the pain points. And I think I've seen it all in the past 15 years or so. So it's actually really, really impactful work. And it feels good to be able to, have clients, a breadth of clients, and be working with them. And it keeps you really sharp, you know?
Yes. So let's take like 10 steps back.
Sure.
Because we understand where you are now, working with tech startups, building out their infrastructure when it comes to sales and operations. But you made a good point that you're first generation. So tell us a little bit about what were some of your childhood aspirations and dreams when you were younger?
Yeah. You know, I'm really open about this story because when I say, you know, I grew up in Massachusetts and I'm first generation, I also like to tell the other side, which is important because the other side for me, by the time I came of age, right? So by the time I was in elementary school and definitely in middle school, my mom was working at a company where she was pretty high up in the ranks. She, God bless her, I mean, she got her college degree with, you know, 3 children, came to this country, got her degree. It took her a few more years, but she did it. And she always stayed in kind of human services, but was, you know, high profile. I grew up seeing my mother go into an office every day, you know, seeing her strive to be better every day. And because she was in an industry that really focused on helping others, I also saw that. So, you know, if someone was like, oh, well, your mom was an executive, to me, you know, she was every woman before I knew what every woman was. So I had kind of this, you know, perception of always striving to do well. But on the other hand, I was also the third, right? My brother and sister were perfectly planned, I think, because they're 2.5 years apart, and then here I come, you know, almost 10 years younger than my brother, 8 years younger than my sister, and you know, I lived a very, very good life, and I was also very different than anyone else in my family. So I went to private school. I went to boarding private school. I didn't board. The school was actually just a few miles up from our house, and the house that everyone called the big house, if that makes sense, because at that point I was literally an only child. My brother and sister were both in college at that point. I grew up in a beautiful Victorian home. And when I say private school, I don't mean parochial. I mean like private school. The tuition, I think, you know, by the time I got to high school was like $53,000+ a year.
Oh, wow.
So my parents, however, were hard workers. And I only had one thing that I needed to do. And I think that is very much the immigrant first generation mentality. And that is, we are providing everything for you. You have, you know, clothes, you have food, you have shelter, you have Jesus, you have church. All you have to do, for me anyway, is make your bed every morning and go to school. And so for a long time, there was this kind of this life that was happening for me, excuse me, going to my private school, which was majority white. I was the only kid of color. I was the only black student, actually, in my grade from 6th grade until I think 9th or 10th grade. And then I had church, which was, you know, my all black, also a mix of first generation, you know, church. So I had a really good balance there. But the biggest message in my house was make your bed and go to school. And what go to school meant for me was very different, I think, than my siblings, because at that point, I think my parents figured out that I was very different in that I had so many other interests outside of getting straight A's. And so, you know, I wasn't a straight A student. I didn't have my parents like breathing down my back, like, you have to do well, you have to get a straight A's because you have to be an engineer, you have to be a doctor or a lawyer. You know, the narratives, kind of those origin stories that we hear so much with first generation immigrants.
Yes.
Yeah, I wasn't getting all of that pressure. And the truth is, I think I would have gone the completely opposite way of success if I was. But what I was interested in were all the things that I was able to work with others and collaborate and also do well in school, right? But I wasn't a STEM scholar student, but I got straight A's, and I was very involved in things that I was passionate about and things that I think kind of was starting to mold my authentic self. So English and history, those classes, which I think especially in my school, which was a liberal private school, we had a liberal core curriculum, which I then went to college that had something similar. It allowed the individual and the teachers to focus on the individual in front of them and really amplify the things that they were good at. And for me, that usually included things that, weren't doctor, engineer, nurse, or teacher oriented, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. It sounds like you didn't feel the pressure that your sisters and brothers felt. I guess it was like your parents understanding, okay, in order for her to truly grow, we've learned about our frustrations with our other kids. Let's just let her just be, as long as she's generating good grades and going to school.
Oh, totally. And I think also, part of what happens when you continue to focus on pride and cultural heritage and keeping the culture alive really through the generations, you want every generation to be better than the last, right? And
yes.
And I'm not going to say that wasn't a challenge for my mom, especially because my stepdad, they got married when I was very young. So him being from the South and also a bit older than my mom, he had a different perspective in life as well. He grew up in kind of the middle of Jim Crow in South Carolina. And so, he certainly had a different perspective, Black American perspective, deep roots here in this country, definitely dating all the way back, right, in the South. And then my mom, on the other hand, I think it was also probably a challenge for her, although I didn't see it so much, but also a bit of a challenge for her to probably think outside of the, outside of the box in what, she probably had dreamed or envisioned for me. And I like to say, which is so true in life, to surrender, right? So there are times that you want to surrender, right? It actually is, surrendering usually allows for passageways to open up, for things and doors to kind of swing open that you never, thought about before. So even for my mom, I think it was probably challenging for her to just step outside of her comfort zone for me and just let me go. Exactly.
So for you, while you were essentially have the freedom.
Yeah.
And that's something that a lot of first generation don't have. We have a lot of people on our first season who are first generation, and they're just no, my parents were do this, do that, do that. And so they have this internal conflict. It sounds like you were in a position where you didn't have that internal conflict on, I have this goal and aspiration that I want to accomplish, but my parents want me to do X, Y, and Z. So what essentially was something that you aspired to be when you were in high school or going into high school? What were some of your thoughts on career path?
Yeah. Well, coincidentally, although it wasn't being drilled into me to become a doctor, I wanted to be a doctor. So you see how that all works.
When you give them the freedom and they'll
when
come
you
up with it on their own.
that there's freedom, and then mixed in there is also, a very heavy dose of encouragement. And having role models right in your own house, right underneath your own roof, right? That really makes a huge impact. So actually, as a child, a kid, I would say 5 years old.
Okay.
I didn't know the name, but I did know that I wanted to be a doctor who delivered babies. And when I learned the word, that being an obstetrician, that was my path. I just had it stuck in my head. And I'm going to, I'm going to say this name, and I think it's important because in retrospect, goodness, it's crazy how many decades between what you think you want to be, who inspired you to do that, and now looking back at it saying, oh my goodness, there's no way. But actually, I was very much inspired by Ben Carson.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was inspired by Ben Carson for a couple of reasons. So I was raised Christian, specifically Seventh-day Adventist, and Ben Carson was as well. And he had a book when I was that came out maybe when I was like 8 or 9 years old called Gifted Hands. And all, the church kids had to read the book. And there was just something about his story that really stuck with me. And I remember writing him a letter. He actually wrote me back, and I wrote him a letter saying, I want to be a doctor just like you. He was a neurosurgeon, but it didn't matter. There was identity there.
He made history as a neurosurgeon.
Oh, absolutely.
Didn't he separate Siamese?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. In the U.S., one of the first doctors to do it. And being Black and striving to do, and be the most excellent that he could be. And I just identified with that. And so actually it pushed me over the edge even further, like I'm going to stick to doing this. So, coincidentally, I should say probably the irony of this is that I did not do very well in science and math, right? The chemistry, the classes in high school you really need to be good at, if that makes sense. But I was okay, right? I wasn't failing just yet, and we should talk about failure because that's so important in life. But I was doing okay enough that when I got into college, I went on that pre-med track and I started to take all of those classes. And I took all of those classes and I actually failed. For the first time in my life, I failed a class, and it was my freshman year. I mean, God bless them. I think it's part of what they do in general when it comes to pre-med students and students in the sciences, but especially when they want to be doctors. They actually want to weed you out pretty quickly. And so, so that happened. I was weeded out very quickly. And I said I'm bringing up his name, Ben Carson, but I also said, and I do really want to make this point, that I had the best role models right underneath my own roof, and I looked up to my parents and my siblings, but other people outside of my household looked up to them too, and my house was the house that everyone came over, during the week. There was always a meal for everyone. You could stop by. It was like, loaves and fishes. They just continued to multiply no matter who was coming over. Lots of parties and, just an open door policy. And also, in addition to that, I was the kid that loved my home. So I didn't like going to sleepovers, or I would go and then I would call my dad at like 2 a.m. in the morning. He'd come pick me up, that sort of thing. But I think it is so, so important to have aspirations and see people and others out there, even when they're so much older than you, even if there's one or two things that you identify with. And yes, back then I identified with Ben Carson on this one thing. I do not identify with him at all today. So I really need to make that disclosure in the disclaimer. I would actually like to have a conversation with the brother, but this is anyway. So
no, but that kind of gives perspective, or leads to perspective around like when your heroes kind of fall off in the sense of being your hero, when you start to really see them as who they are, as they grow and mature, and they grow and mature in different ways than what you're familiar with.
Sure.
So talk to us a little bit about where that shift occurred, where you went from aspiring to be like Ben Carson as the doctor specifically, to not flunking out, but not doing well.
I mean, that's harsh, but we'll talk about it.
but failing out of pre-med, like, what did you do next? Like, what was your next step after your first experience, it sounds like, with failure?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, well, okay, so I was, I think, pretty precocious, right? So the interesting thing I would say about me, and that I've kept, and I just started to really come into it in the past few years, and I've just started to accept it, and that is, I have a really high threshold for, and a short memory, but a high threshold for resourcefulness and trying different things, and also failing in different ways, if that makes sense.
And talk to us a little bit. Say that again, though. You said failing in different ways.
Yes.
Okay.
Failing in different ways, right? So I would go after the blue ribbon in anything that I wanted to, if that made sense. But if I came in last, which some people would think would be a failure, for me, it was actually a learning experience. And I was just proud of myself for trying. And I think that is not necessarily an easy thing for most people to accept, right? Because if you're going after something, and especially if you're kind of like a triple type A personality person, failure is not even an option.
Right.
And so failing in different ways, right? So there was failing in college, actually failing a class in college, which is very different, in my opinion, than, failing a test, for example, in college, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to like piecemeal out failure, but once you start to fail, you, in my opinion, start to fail fast, and you fail forward, hopefully. And you also start to fail in different ways. I'm a divorced woman. I have a failed marriage in my life as well. And so that doesn't compare to my failed class. But because I failed my one class in college, it actually opened up an entire different world for me, because I had to sit back and say, okay, what is it that I want to do? What am I good at?
Yes.
And as a freshman in college, that's a hard enough question. I think you're questioning. It's you should be evolving and questioning yourself about this as you go along anyway.
Right.
But it opened up an entirely different world, and I started to go after different things, and I started to try different things. And so I actually eventually, fell into, and just let me put this out there, I graduated from college with 2 degrees, 3 minors. I also placed completely out of my first, basically 2 years of college, because I took so many great classes, and I went to a private school, so it placed me out of a lot of the core curriculum, and it was a competitive school. So, but it allowed me to go after my different interests. One of them was political science. So I was a government and law major. I stuck with what I loved, which was English, right? And so that was my second major, and it leveled everything out for me. I ended up picking up a minor in women's studies. And I mean, I think failing, no matter what, wherever you are in your life, is actually just an indication that it is time, most likely, to try something new.
Yes. I love failure. It's weird to say that, but when I was in college, I realized that, okay, if I get a C, life isn't over. If I don't graduate with the GPA that I want, life's not over. I can still try different things and still be successful. Because I think in college, that's when I realized that sales was the route for me. So I stopped putting a lot of, I guess, pressure on myself to be like an A-B student. Like, I became okay with some C's, a lot of C's, and some B's.
Yeah.
Like, I became that person that was like, okay, college is great as long as I get the degree. That's the end goal. And then for me, because the career field that I was going into wasn't really dependent upon my grades from college, it allowed me to just really focus on my sales career, right? So I love the fact that you're speaking about failure, because I think a lot of people are scared to fail. They see it as a bad word, but I think we're on the same page where we're looking at failure as redirection and not as something that's bad. And I'll say that again. I'll do that for myself.
Yeah.
Failure is just redirection,
Right.
And it sounds like it redirected you in a way where you were able to graduate with multiple degrees, multiple minors, but you were in a happier disposition because of it.
Absolutely.
I met you at Chantel George. She's episode 7, season 1, and she owns a company called Sisters in Sales. And we went to one of her events because I support all of my currency shifters. Welcome to the family.
Thank you.
And you were on the panel and you told us this story about how when you were in college, you essentially started your own mini company. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So talking about sales really and sort of going down that path started pretty early for me. I should have known. I mean, most of my family is in sales in some capacity or they have their own business. But I wasn't paying attention to that, right? I was actually, I was very much paying, let me put it this way. I was minding my own business, right? And trying to figure out things for myself. Okay, so when I was a freshman in college, my second semester, my father became very ill. Unexpectedly, he had a brain aneurysm that then put him into a coma for several months. And so I grew up very fast. At that point, I was living this like rose-colored, life, and I was very, very close with my father. And then suddenly I realized that, okay, not only is the attention in my family, we really need to focus on getting him healthy, at that point, just getting him out of the coma, making, certain decisions in life that really make you grow up very quickly when you think about more life and death and mortality and what that means for the most special people in your life that you love. And it also meant for me that it was time for me to be more independent.
Right.
And, people meet me today or they've met me through, years and in my adulthood, and they probably would never believe that I didn't even know how to do my laundry when I went to college. My dad did my laundry. Like, I didn't know how to cook. I mean, I couldn't boil water without burning it, right?
Oh, wow.
So it's hard to believe now, patting myself on the back a little bit here. But my dad was and had a huge influence. I only give those examples to also say that I was also not aware of any sort of financial burden, if that made sense. I saw my parents working really hard. And look, that there's a gift and a curse there. I very fundamentally believe in teaching children about finance as soon as you can. I think that's really important. But here I was freshman year, and I had never asked, where is the money for college books coming from? Where is the money for tuition coming from? Where is the money to feed me in college coming from? Oh, where is the money when I want to go, to France? Where is that coming from to study abroad?
Yeah.
Well, that was a moment in time for me, and I decided at that moment that I needed to pitch in. And metaphorically speaking, if we think about those times in our lives when we need to pitch in, whether it's professionally or personally, or a combination of both, pitching in means usually going beyond what you are aware of and even what you know that you need to do. You just know that you need to be helpful. And for me, I pitched in on the financial side, and I was the neighborhood babysitter in my neighborhood growing up. And so I just thought, okay, what are my transferable skills for pitching in here? Oh, where are the babies, right? And I started to babysit on my campus, and I started to babysit. That started my sophomore year.
What kids were you babysitting?
Professor kids.
Okay.
Yeah, my professors. And then in any good sales cycle one, and also any healthy sales organization, tying it all in, the number one best way you can get business is word of mouth. So then they started telling other professors or their other friends. And then I, was blessed enough to actually do a semester on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., at American University. And I was in the Women in Politics program there. And I went to D.C. and I brought my little business with me. And they had, back then, we didn't have social media. We had all of these messaging boards. So there was an internal messaging board that was just for babysitters. And I started to babysit for professors there and then just, random strangers. What happened is I started to get so much business because people were spreading the word.
Right.
And I also made myself not under market, but definitely competitive in my pricing. And I started bringing my own supplies, and I was getting all of these clients that I started to hire other women to be babysitters. And so by the time I actually left American University, it wasn't even my home state, it wasn't even my home turf. At that point, I had helped so many other college students that also needed a little bit of supplemental income. And I had just a circle of babysitters. I think there were probably between 7 to 9 of us at that point. And so what I would do is I would, get all of the jobs, and then I would outsource, and I would manage that relationship to make the client comfortable, the parents comfortable, that they weren't getting me, but they were getting someone that was, very
good.
exactly.
Yeah.
I would do the vetting, and then I would take a percentage of their babysitting money.
And this is all while you were in college?
This is all while I was in college. So I was at American U. My sophomore or junior year. Anyway, it was all when I was in college. But I started babysitting very early on when I was at Lafayette.
Okay. So once you graduated, what was your next step? Because you had this thriving business, you learned how to do your own laundry, you became self-sufficient, you have the independent woman thing going on, and you have all this pride, and now what?
Yeah, law school.
Okay.
I mean, there was a point in time, right? So I went from, again, interesting to think about these origin stories. So I wasn't forced to do any of these things yet. On my own, I decided, okay, I want to be a doctor. That didn't work out. And then on my own, I decided I want to go to law school.
Yes.
So what actually happened is I didn't go to law school, which probably was the best decision ever. Because, look, you're still... I'm not convinced that there are many 21-year-olds out there that can confidently tell me that what they want to do at 21 is what they will be doing at 31, for example, or something like that, right?
Yeah, that's so true.
And so I was just kind of going down the path, the safe zone path. It was very safe for me to go to law school because that was one of the degrees that I, got in college. It made perfect sense. And instead, I actually moved to California right after college because I had a summer job. So I mentioned this maybe, but I'll amplify it here. And that is when I left Springfield for college, I never went back. And so, I think one of my superpowers is intuition, but the other one would definitely be being resourceful. And so I always had an internship in those summers that paid me and fed me. And it just so happened that the company that I'd been with those last 2 summers was called NSLC, National Student Leadership Conference. And so it paid me and it fed me. And I lived in Virginia. I lived in California. It was a great opportunity. And so I went to work for them right after I graduated. And I was figuring things out, to be honest with you. I knew that law school was just not the option for me. Yeah. And by the way, I also knew at that point, after failing in some things, I knew that I would not make it in law school. I just knew it. That's just not where my interests were. Anyway, moved to California, and then several months later moved back to the East Coast, and I moved to New York. I actually fell in love, and that was, my first husband, now my ex-husband, but that was a time in life where I never thought I would end up in New York. I just was like, oh my gosh, it's so busy and kind of dirty. I don't understand it. What's going on here? I really was thinking about going into politics at that point. And so I was interviewing in both D.C. and New York. And I will always tell anyone that love makes the world go round. So I went to where my world was going around, and that was New York, where my love was.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then I went to corporate America. I mean, it's like, it's probably the most cookie cutter part of my life was between the ages of maybe like 21 to 24, to be honest. I went to corporate America, and I was, at Saks Fifth Avenue.
Right.
At a time where the economy was doing great, and I couldn't understand how all my colleagues were, had these credit limits. They were wearing like Prada and Gucci and Yves Saint Laurent and all Chanel, like all these things. like my house account, I think had $300 on it just because, I just couldn't understand it. And I understood it very quickly because there were a lot of parents that were bankrolling rents and things like that.
Yeah.
And for me, my father was actually still ill, so it took him, he was with us for a few years. He eventually did pass away. But, from the time, freshman year where I was like, it's time for me to pitch in, that mentality never left me. I mean, thank God it actually never left me. But
And that's important to note that once you have that mentality, it's really hard to turn it off.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because I've had that mentality since I was 12. When I had my own experience with my mom and colon cancer, it was just like, all right, I got to make it. So here's what I have to do in order to be successful. Let's straight and narrow.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about where that shift occurred from the corporate to what you do now.
Yeah. So that is actually the currency shift, if you ask me. Okay. It happened when I left Saks Fifth Avenue and went to my very first startup. And it happened pretty quickly. So in New York, at that time, retail was king. I mean, these big department stores were just, you couldn't get around them. And something really interesting happened when I was at Saks. And, it's public knowledge, but there was a massive lawsuit that came down about chargebacks. And I was pretty low on the totem pole, so I'll be honest at that point. So none of this was going to touch me.
Talk to them a little bit about what chargebacks are, just for the people who are not in the industry.
Yeah, sure. So in retail, when you have vendors or designers that are sending their products to you, they commit contractually to getting their goods to the stores in a certain amount of time with a little bit of leeway, but basically it has to hit the floor to sell. So every day that you're missing the sell, and it could be because it's caught in customs, it could be because the shipment was late, whatever that means, every day that your end user, that being the department store in this case, misses a sales day is revenue lost. And so they charge the vendor. And there are all sorts of scenarios for chargebacks, but that's the one that most people know. So there were some shady chargebacks happening for several years. And again, this is all public knowledge at Saks, and it just happened to be when I was there. And when I say I was very low on the totem pole, I say that, and it is true in the corporate structure, but in my opinion, this is the best position to be in because you learn everything, because you are doing all of the work and you are doing all of the scrappy work and you are doing the admin work, but you also are proving yourself and learning what gave me the strongest foundation in a quantitative and qualitative background as a salesperson, to be able to think in both like empathy, business first, and also collaborative with your client, but to also understand the revenue and the numbers, it makes a huge difference. Saks gave that to me. So, and that's because I was doing the scrappy work. And I happened to be a part of the team where we were bringing in all these brand new vendors. This small little designer at the time named Tori Birch, that she was in no other department stores, and we had a little shop for her. We were the first ones to bring her in. It didn't do great. She got out of the contract, went to Bloomingdale's. It blew up, right?
Wow.
So I was a part of that group. So it was exciting times. Well, it was also a dismal day, the day I came into work, and, men in suits and briefcases came in and basically took out half of my floor because they were involved knowingly and unknowingly in this chargeback situation.
Wow.
And I perked up, and I think most people would be like, oh, this is a great opportunity for me to like keep going up the ladder. It makes it easier for me. And for me, I said, this is a great opportunity for me to leave. Like, this is not a very nurturing environment. And the truth is, I'd learned the structure fairly well at that point. And there's not a ton of innovation in the corporate structure of retail. What there is, though, is a structure. So if you really want, you could just keep going step by step up that ladder. It's a pretty well-known fact. It's pretty difficult to be, especially back then, to be a Black woman and become a buyer in any one of these stores. So those were few and far between. And so I started to look elsewhere, and I went back to kind of my familiarity, and I started reaching out to alum from Lafayette. And a woman, her name is Missy Godfrey, and I would coin her as probably my first real mentor, because she was this dynamic woman, I should say. She had 2 offices, one on Wall Street, and then the other at a company called Spa Finder, this like startup. And she said, like your interests could kind of align with, they're looking for salespeople. Why don't you talk to them? I'd never heard of the company, could not understand what the internet's meant, selling digital media. What is that? I don't get it, but it sounds cool
and this is like
kind
the
of
early,
edgy.
The early 2000s?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'm like, this is cool and kind of edgy. Okay, fine. I'll have a conversation. And I remember going into the office, and there were no offices. It was just all tables, the open concept. And my interview was with the CEO. And I was just bowled over that I could have direct access. And yeah, I actually had no clue what I would be selling. I had no idea really what the company was becoming. At the time, I think there were maybe 30, maybe 40 employees. Yeah. And so I went from a behemoth retail company to a 40-person company. And that was my first startup.
And it's going from corporate structure to a startup structure is very different. It's kind of like a culture shock in itself, but then it's also like I don't know how to explain it exactly, but it's just a really interesting conflict a little bit because you're so used to structure. You're used to, all right, this is my straight path to the top. But when you go to a startup, it's like, I can go anywhere. I can, if I want to do this, I could just do that.
Absolutely.
So talk to us a little bit about like what types of struggles or conflicts occurred going from a very structured environment to basically like a free-flowing environment.
Well, so, I think structure, though I had it in court, it was the path that I went down. Structure never really held a lot of water for me, if that made sense, because can I say that in many instances I was also blazing little trails?
Yes.
And then people were following me down those trails, or I would blaze the trail and then like my spirit would come after, but like something else, I was at the forefront, but I think also always hitching my wagon on to things that I could be more of my authentic self in. And I didn't have this language before a few years ago, right? I didn't know what that meant, but I did know, and I was starting to form then, especially going to my first startup, what I was good at, what I was passionate at, and then where I could make money. So I'll answer your question directly now, which is, like not having structure for people who are used to structure and who thrive in structure, going to a seed or Series A or early tech startup is probably not the best fit because there is very little structure. Things change every single day. You have to be kind of okay flying by the seat of your pants, but also very focused on the mission and your impact, because, your impact at an early stage startup is as impactful as your leadership team, if there is even a leadership team, right? That's really formed. And so for me, my biggest conflict was, okay, well, I don't know how to do these things. So it was my very first sales job. So it's not that I didn't, I really just didn't know how to sell. And by the way, I also didn't know what I was selling. So online media, like ads, that's what we were selling at the time. That was brand new. I mean, I think Google had just come out with their pay-per-click model. Like this was all new. Plus, we were convincing clients who were buying, one-page ads in all these magazines for $30,000 with no measurables behind it, right? You have no idea if it was that ad, this ad, whatever. and telling them, you know what, let's do these things called banners, online, on the internet, and selling that. But I think also because it was so new for me and also so new in general in the world, it actually, everyone was learning at the same time. But I love your point. It is a very good point, which is the level of autonomy that I had matched my personality and matched me so well. And what I learned very early on is that sales wasn't all about filling out some sales sheet and getting commission. It was about the human to human connection. It's about influence. And by the way, influencing in a really transparent and honest way, which is something that it was really important for me to learn, I think, early on. And also the thing that I loved about sales and getting into tech sales specifically is that it was really innovative. I was able to go out there and say, you may not have ever heard of my company, but you know me, and also this is what we're doing. This is how we're changing the world. This is how we're being impactful. And at Spa Finder, it actually was very much a human sale because we were talking about wellness, right? And what I was selling was, don't you want to spread this message around the world? And I was very lucky because this autonomy also allowed me to shine in a way that would have never happened at any other big corporate company. Yes. I ended up going into my first sales position on the B2B side and then switched to the B2C side. In less than a year, I was promoted there.
Talk to them a little bit about what B2B and what B2C is.
Yeah, so B2B is business to business and B2C is business to consumer, which back then was very straightforward. Now we have all sorts of things, right? We have B2B to C, business to consumer. We have SaaS sales, sales as a service, or solutions as a service, sorry. And that's, a lot of people know SaaS companies now, right?
Yeah.
And we have apps now. I mean, these things didn't really exist, and I'm a little bit aging myself, but it wasn't that long ago. I mean, it was probably like 14-ish years ago. But yeah, so I went over to the consumer side, and then I was managing huge accounts like, Hilton's and Ritz-Carlton's and Canyon Ranches. And I was also at that point leading our entire West Coast. And so I was flying from New York out to the West Coast somewhere, every other week or so. And then, we really wanted to dive into the Central and South America market, and no one really wanted to take that on. And it was the first time that I started to say yes to things that people were saying no to. And I built that Central and South America business, and I was so proud of that. I mean, the work that I did with that company was really the entry point for me to go anywhere else in my tech professional life.
And you were the only Black woman at this company, or were there others?
Oh, that's such a good question because, by the way, I don't want to say that you become desensitized. You just become used to not seeing people that look like you. So, to fast forward anecdotally, I was at South by Southwest co-hosting the Black Tech Meetup with the Avant-Garde Network, which is a fantastic Black professional network here in New York. And I just anecdotally said, when I started coming to South by 10 years ago, I would walk by a shop, and if there was a reflection and I saw myself, I thought it was another Black person. I got really excited, but it was just me. So yes, I was actually, so I was one of the only Black women at that company. I want to say I might have been the first, but I don't want to give myself that title without it being too accurate. There was a second woman that came on, though, not in a leadership or management position at that point. But when she came on, she came in as our intern, actually. And coincidentally, years later, when I was at Guilt Group, she was also at Guilt Group. So, we both actually ended up staying in tech. But yeah, I was one of the only. But I've always been one of the only.
Yes, even from private school.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So talk to us a little bit about how you transitioned from working at this particular startup to the next startup to actually doing your own thing.
Yeah. So that's a pretty quick slope, and I'm going to go through it quickly on purpose because I think the biggest themes that I want to pull out for you and everyone listening, and even for myself, because I do reflection exercises, and I do like to do them because I think it reminds me of a journey that has been, and then where I am today and where I'm going, right?
Yes.
So I left Spa Finder. I actually moved to San Francisco in between that time. Went to San Francisco. I was there for about 6 months or so. And I came back and I had coffee with a friend of mine. And at the time, he had just launched a company called Jet Setter, which it was this tiny little travel company taking on, Sabre Holdings, so like Expedia, and, Travelocity, that whole world. And it was under this umbrella of this other company that had just started about a year prior to that called Gilt Group. And I was a member of Gilt Group, and so it was hard for me to connect the two. I was like, yeah, but that's fashion, clothes, sample sale online at a discount, and then travel, right? I don't get it. And I sat down with him, and what I realized very quickly is that both companies, well, the umbrella company, but both entities were filled, chock filled with innovators, doers, builders, foundation builders. And at that point, I had been at Spa Finder probably for about 3.5, 4 years. And we had also moved into the SaaS space with another product called Spa Booker. And so I don't want to say I was itching. I was actually very happy because now I didn't have to fly across country to the West Coast. I was living there. But it was one of those situations where I sat down with him and he told me this idea, told me this concept, and then he was like, please come join my team. Like which made sense because at that point I was pretty well known in the industry, doing really good, impactful work, and kind of just knew it like the back of my hand. And he just said, would you consider moving back to New York? And I was like, no thanks. Incredible opportunity,
right?
But absolutely not. Like, I just moved across the continent 6 months ago. And he goes, okay, fine. I figured you would say that. But we just launched another company, and it's in beta. And there's only a few employees right now here in New York. And I think they're looking to launch the West Coast, so San Francisco and LA. Can give me 2 minutes, talk to the president. And the president came in, and yes, it was a very small team. And he said, so this is what we're doing. It's called Gilt City, and we're focused on experiences. And that was all I knew about the company. The rest of our conversation was really around like the kind of person that would succeed, the kind of people that they were looking for. There was this, when passion meets passion, you could see it. But besides just passion, because I think especially women get put in this pigeonhole. If you're passionate, you're unfocused. You just have all these other things that you're doing or your brain is going. And that is simply not true.
Yes.
But he was really passionate about what they were building. And frankly, he was also really transparent that he didn't really know what they were building, right? And that he needed people who could contribute to that vision and make it happen. And if it's the one thing that I know for sure, and that always has been, is collaboration constantly is the best way to getting things done, along with conflict. Conflict is okay. And I will tell you that I think we had that conversation on Tuesday. I had the offer by Friday. I jumped on that rocket ship very early on. I was employee number 11 there. So like very, very early on. The first one on the West Coast. Built out those markets, both LA and San Francisco, then focused on San Francisco. Moved back to New York when my GM at the time asked me to come back and build out tertiary markets within inside sales team. So I came back to New York about 3 years into being in Silicon Valley, which was a tremendous opportunity and also awesome just to be in it, right, in Silicon Valley. At the same time, the tech community here in New York was booming and is booming, and I think rivals any kind of tech hub that we can even talk about in the U.S. now. And I built all of those markets, and then I crashed and burned, and I was burned out, like completely burned out. I was there for about 4.5 years. And there was an opportunity to exit. We were also going through, so kind of a little bit like Saks, what happened is it was a very high in the tsunami, and then the bubble completely burst. And, retailers learned how to market better to their customers. They basically took our motto, which is, to me, the most flattering thing. When what you are doing actually changes and disrupts an entire industry and influences in a way that makes it more accessible for most people. And that's what had happened. And so I took some time. I had at Gilt, when you were there for a few years, I think 3 years, you got a 3-week sabbatical. When you're there for 5 years, you got a 4-week sabbatical. So I was actually there for 4 years, and I finally took my 3-week sabbatical before I left. And I went and I volunteered in Tanzania and Africa. And I always said if I worked for a company that would allow me some time, I would go and focus on volunteering outside of my community, because I do a lot of that here. Yeah. And I worked with women with this great organization called Cross Cultural Solutions in the bush, specifically for them to get microfinancing for their small businesses. And that usually included like raising chickens and geese and pigs and seeing the infrastructure of these tribal women. I mean, I was totally off the grid, and it completely changed my perspective. It was very hard for me to come back and sell luxury experiences at that point. And just like anything else in life, right? There was an exit. There was an opportunity, another, kind of another little path for me to blaze down. And I left, and I took 8 months off, went to a pure tech company, which was very interesting. But, I think ultimately I knew that I needed to do my own thing, and I didn't know what it looked like until I started going through my divorce. And then I realized, oh, wait, so I've had all these professional opportunities. Here is the personal life transition after being with the same person for 12 years. And also in many ways, not remaining the same person, myself, for all those years. Let me really consider what life looks like for me now.
So this occurred after you felt burnt out.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I burnt out from Gilt and then went to a different company. I took 8 months off, though. Yeah. And that was really essential. So I have some really interesting original content, but throughout the years, I've been an advisor at a couple of tech accelerators here in New York. And I realized that this was happening not just to founders, but to a bunch of tech executives, right? Like you can only build, and at that point I'd built 4 startups from the same exact stage. It takes a tremendous amount of energy out of you, which is why it's so important to connect to something that you really believe in. And also, by the way, that culturally, especially the leadership team or the team in general, that you can stand because you want to win with them, but when you lose, you also want to lose with respect and integrity. And so, I that burnout was very real. And I teach a workshop now on, it's called Burnout Rehab, and that most people in the U.S., they're actually taking somewhere between 2 to 3 days off on average between gigs. Most executives are able to take about 30 days off, but if you put that in a lifetime of working, that's not very much time. I mean, this goes far, far, far beyond just what burnout means. It goes into, parental leave in our country and like all other things that we could socially be doing better for family and for the professional. But, Burnout Rehab is all about unlocking a part of your brain that you would not be using in your daily work. So do other things. And for me, so if I'm fast forwarding a little bit, for me, when I was going through my divorce, it was really interesting because the company that I was at, I ended up leaving and exiting that company. And within a month, was going through an active divorce. And so here I was, right, not working, right? So there wasn't this identity pull there. Right. And also going through what turned into a pretty contentious, unfortunately, divorce. And I was kind of standing on my own 2 feet and saying, all right, it's time for me to take my own advice. Mm-hmm. So let me unlock the part of my brain that I wouldn't be doing in tech sales, growth, management, innovation, all those things. And that thing that came to me was interior design, which is nothing that what HeartSpace does today. But I'm so glad that I did, because what happened is that I ended up designing a few different brownstones in Brooklyn, where I was living at the time. Mm-hmm. And it kind of just put an entirely new creative energy into me that I didn't know that I had. But I think even more importantly, kind of even gave me the confidence to say, okay, this is kind of like me starting my own thing again, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think I can do this. So let me just figure out what that looks like. And that's where HeartSpace was born out of.
All right, perfect. So we talk a lot about mental health on the podcast because me personally, I think it's essential to anyone and everyone to have like a delicate balance between their mental health, their emotional health, and then what they're doing full time. And it sounds like you have already created something around mental health. Mm-hmm. So talk to us a little bit more about what you do personally outside of unlocking the part of the brain that you don't use, or if that is essentially what you do for your mental health and just balance. Because I can only imagine like everything that you were going through, because I have like 2 step parents. Mm-hmm. You know, I have a stepdad, I have a stepmom, so I've seen the divorce aspect, and I know how grueling that can be. Mm-hmm. But how did you take care of yourself during that time period? Yeah. And then how do you continue to take care of yourself now?
Oh, I love this question. I love the question because I can be really honest about it. So, a little bit of my own personal business. I mean, hey y'all, right? We're here to be very, to be honest. And I think for me also, I'm very open about my divorce story because I felt very isolated at the time. Mm-hmm. And also, it's not always just about divorce, right? So I say, look, I was 50% of a failed marriage. And that is true. That is just the fact. Mm-hmm. But the other side of this is that there was an affair and a child that I had no idea about. Mm. And so when I did find that out, I found out all by myself. And it was never admitted to me until we actually ended up, going through the court system, which was unfortunate because I just wanted to show up authentically. I really wanted this other person to show up authentically, but you cannot control what other people do, which leads me to my whole point your whole point, I should say, about mental health. Because what do you do? And trauma is universal. I don't care what it looks like. It could be divorce. It could be abuse. It could be childhood trauma. It could be anything. Trauma to me is universal. Mm-hmm. And we are never so isolated. There is always someone else that has gone through the same thing or something very similar. But for me, I knew that I needed a third-party, very strong sounding board because I'm a pretty assertive person when it really comes down to it. And assertive in my emotions, and also I am a Cancer, by the way. But it's just part of my DNA. I'm assertive in my emotions, but can also be assertive in things like, my point of view, my opinion, and just in general things like that. And so I needed for myself to seek therapy immediately because what I knew, and I couldn't figure it out, but like at the time before I got to therapy, but what I knew for sure is that I absolutely didn't want to feel like I was alone. Yes. I didn't want to feel a sense of embarrassment. And interestingly, I did not want to feel victimized. Like I didn't want to play a victim role. So I actually went to therapy. And when I went to therapy on my own, I was coming out of a place where I had surrendered to the fact that I was giving my ex-partner every opportunity to be honest with me, even though I knew what the truth was, and he never showed up that way. But instead, I needed someone to continue to remind me how I show up is all I was in control of.
Yes.
And that actually very much helped me, not just through my divorce in that time, but it is actually where I started to learn a lot of the energy language and living that I do now, right? It is when, I surrendering to knowing that I can only control how I show up, and being your most authentic self and figuring out what that means for yourself. My mental health is very, very much grounded in therapy. And it's not traditional. Traditional therapy looks at conflict therapy, which is like conflict resolution from childhood and those kinds of things through your whole life. When I describe my childhood to my therapist, she's like, okay, well, we've just saved about, 6 months of therapy because you had a great childhood. That's not what we need to focus on. And that's actually true. But I actually focused on myself in therapy. And it's okay to be like selfish and self-centered when it comes to protected and safe spaces. And so, I ended up going to court for a year straight, which shouldn't have happened. But the truth is that I was always just showing up the best that I could be, right? And not trying to control anything else. So therapy is a big part of my life. It was then, it still is now. I don't want to gloss over, though, the importance of also of being responsible for yourself, if that makes sense, even when you feel crippled and it feels like you can't. The one thing that I do, and I hope this is helpful for someone, is, on a daily basis, I don't know that I would call them affirmations, but I definitely do Simmone, you're confident. And like, move on with my day. Or, Simmone, like, you caught that train, like, good on you. Like, the little wins. And that's how I've always, by the way, managed my teams in little wins. That's how I currently, manage and approach my relationships with my clients who are, they are large, very well-known tech clients that we have. And to go in there and talk about, heart space being the place in which you can do all of these things. And then guess what? By the way, also drive revenue, increase diversity, inclusion, look at how that dynamically works in a sales team to increase revenue for the entire organization, right? Like, that's the work that we do. And then we do the real work, right? We're building sales stacks and CRMs, and I have coders and developers in my collective. And by the way, they're all women. Well, there's one man now, but they were all women for a long time. So my mental health and focusing on that in the small wins every single day collectively, for me anyway, is how I keep myself going. But I also take those days or even those weeks, by the way, where I am doing nothing, if that makes sense. And everyone has a different way of doing things. I can't meditate. I'm not able to stay quiet long enough. I've tried. I do work out quite a bit. Yes. This year I do one triathlon a year. My first one was 2 years ago, so I'm looking at doing my third this year. It's an Olympic triathlon. So, those things are important.
Yes. 100%. Like, I love my therapist that I go to just because it keeps a balance, and the stuff that you want to tell your friends because they know you at certain times in your life. So sometimes that image of who you were when they bonded with you is the image that they stick with sometimes. That's right. So for me, it's important to have somebody that knows nothing about me, but can tell me how to make myself better. Yeah. Like, I love where you said you have to be responsible for yourself. And that's super, super important. So transitioning, I look at you as a disruptor in the tech space, right? You have your own company, Heart Space, that has been just phenomenal in the tech industry, helping tech companies build infrastructure from the ground up. So I appreciate you telling your story on the show and having this time with Currency Shift. But I want to talk about your social currency a little bit. So with Currency Shift, it's all about meeting with first only or disruptives like yourself and helping you tell your story about how you're moving forward, whether you're the first, the only, or if you're disrupting a whole industry. But it's also how you use your social currency to do so. So social currency is building social networks to gain access, influence, resources, and networking in the digital space that affects a person online and offline. On LinkedIn, you have over 500 connections and over 2,188 followers. So it looks like you're using your LinkedIn quite frequently to build your social currency. But talk to us on how social media has influenced or empowered your business.
Yeah, sure. So this is a really good and timely question for me because I'm doing all sorts of revisions when it comes to what my social currency means. I love that term, by the way, social currency. I think it makes, a lot of sense because it truly is these days, right? Mm-hmm. I'll start with LinkedIn. LinkedIn was always easy for me. And I say easy only because it was easy for me to understand, right? Yeah. It's a professional network, full stop, period. There was nothing more that I really needed to understand about LinkedIn.
Right.
And so it was so black and white for me that when I joined LinkedIn, it was fantastic because I can really focus on what I'm doing there professionally. Of course, it's grown in so many different ways and it's since been acquired, but it was very straightforward. I focus on LinkedIn mainly because I'm actually a pretty public-private person, if that makes sense.
100%.
And
yeah.
my personal Instagram is private. My Instagram is private. I don't have an Instagram for my business entities. I think Instagram is doing a really good job of allowing folks to build business, very obviously on Instagram, but also not for just these direct-to-consumer, like fashion brands or product, right? I find that there are more and more people that are taking their consulting agencies or whatever their companies are, to Instagram. And I see them very differently, right? So like Instagram to me tells a very different story than even a Facebook and definitely than LinkedIn. And LinkedIn has just been the place where I tell everyone to go. So there are two big things here. One, and I would encourage everyone to do this just environmentally, I got rid of business cards years ago, like 7 to 8 years ago. I haven't had a business card in many, many years. And it does a couple of things. For a woman especially, standing up, introducing yourself, and then not testing the other person, but having that person really focus on you without a barrier or something else identifying you, like a business card, means so much to me. The second thing is like the awkward business card pull, when someone's like, oh, let me give you a business card. I typically say to them, I will take your business card, but I'm just going to connect with you on LinkedIn if you're on LinkedIn. And if not, I'll shoot you an email, but I'm going to recycle your card. And that's my second big thing is like, let's protect the environment. There is a lot happening these days with paper. So, and we can do our parts to just not, and business cards, little tiny business cards are not the way that I feel like saving some footprint there for me anyway means a lot. And actually, I don't go on business trips anymore. I'm bringing home stacks of business cards or bringing them with me and then forgetting them. So, digital connections professionally, very interesting for me and will remain interesting to me. And that's where I tell people to connect with me. And I'm really good on LinkedIn. I will respond to you pretty immediately and then move that over to email. So going back to Instagram, though, the reason that this is interesting to me now is so Heart Space is doing really well, and we're growing, by the way, and the collective itself is shifting a little bit because, and I do want to put this out there because the way that our kind of economy is going and what being employed means. Everyone in the collective is actually fully employed. They have full-time jobs, and they're director level or above, but they have full-time jobs in which they are able to take on other challenges because, one, they want to stay competitive in their own markets. Two, they want to stay really sharp. And three, they want supplemental income.
Mm-hmm.
So I bring them in and out of engagements, and it works tremendously well. And my clients are very aware of that. And so that has been impactful, not just for Heartspace, but also the clients in which we're working. But I'm thinking of making the collective actually more of kind of like a socialist community, right? So that, we're actually doing a heavier rev share if you're bringing in new business, and that there is an opportunity for you to grow your own business. And, you have a point person like me always on site with the client, but kind of directing traffic where we need to. So LinkedIn, again, is one of those places where I'm able to, see the talent and be connected with talent that way. But Instagram is most likely the place where I'm going to be building my new company. I'm always on stealth in something, by the way.
I love it, though.
And I'm in stealth on a really, really, really good thing right now that has been brewing for, I would say, the past 4 or 5 years. And just, I think the time in the space, also med tech has really, come to the forefront, and it's focused on women's health. It's very niche, super interesting, definitely impactful. I would say disruptor. Cannot tell you exactly what it is.
That's fine. We'll stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Season 3.
Yes.
You're welcome back.
But Instagram will most likely be the place where that company really takes off in terms of social currency.
Excellent. So when you're networking and connecting with these women and the guy that's a part of the collective, is it mainly through LinkedIn and then shifting to email? Is that kind of the starting point?
Yeah. So I've been really lucky in that when I started Heartspace, I sent out one email to maybe 120 folks, people I've worked with for many years, past clients and friends, family. And that's where all of our business has come from. And then I started the collective because, you're always stronger as a team. You want a team, and you also want a different perspective, and you want diverse perspectives to solve problems. And I'm all about that. So, I started to just reach out to women that I've worked with before, and then those women put me in touch with other women in their circles. You see how that works?
The relationship.
You want to keep it as much in the ecosystem as possible. And then the one guy came from the other women, and so I was like, okay, fine. But it really that's how I've found everyone in the collective. But I'm always looking on LinkedIn, by the way. I'm always interested in seeing what other people are doing. And I've taken this on in 2019 to be less of a voyeur and more active in not just likes and things, but actually using my voice, which I think is my instrument to be involved in communities that I'm putting my energy into, which is why I've also dropped a bunch of, networking things that I've done, right? Because there comes a point, first of all, we only have but so much time in the day, and our time is the most valuable asset that we have.
Right.
And second of all, I think it becomes less about the transaction of things, and transactional relationships are just not so interesting to me anymore. I'm just getting old. I think that's the other side of it, right? But with wisdom, you have power, and with power, it is also the power to choose.
Yes, 100%. I love that transition that you have there with the power to choose and wisdom, which brings me to my question for you. If you had an opportunity to put one piece of advice out of everything that you've learned from your childhood, from watching your parents, from your college experience to everything that you've done thus far, if you had an opportunity to put one piece of advice on a Post-it on your desk, what would that be?
Yeah. So the one Post-it, it's 2 words, and it would be stay curious. Stay curious. Curiosity is the thing to me that So the curiosity killed the cat, right? There's that saying that is very true. But
Yes.
look, if the cat never tried to begin with, right? And I'm sure that cat tried a lot of things before finding or before coming to its final fate. Curiosity, and I've heard other people use that. I mean, look, I was also going to say, okay, stay resilient, but I actually don't know that resiliency is it's not innate. I know that for sure. But I do know that curiosity is something that challenges mindsets. It challenges yourself. It challenges the people around you. And though, challenging things it sounds exhausting. It actually, I think, very much allows you to pursue evolution in ways that you just didn't know. And so curiosity is my best advice. And by the way, any generation, when
Yes.
I'm, talking to a group of college students, I'm telling them to fail and stay curious. When I'm talking to folks my experience and age, I'm saying the same thing. And even older, when I talk to the elders, like, folks who are much older and also more experienced than
Yes.
me, they always say, like, I wish I had done this thing if I had just opened my mind a little bit.
Right.
Or I did do this thing because I kept an open mind. And it to me just translates to being curious. And I think especially just going back to being, first generation, also being a Black woman, I'm half Black, I'm half Indian. There's, a lot going on there. And I have an interesting, background in childhood and adult years and things. To me, curiosity also just takes down barriers. So I'm not telling myself no most of the time. It is a rare occasion that I'm saying no. I have a friend that says, that says to me, gosh, you're just like one of the most confident people that I know. Like, how do you do that? But I think it's confidence is, for me, also goes hand in hand with curiosity. It doesn't mean that I'm confident because I know I'm going to fill in the blank with some sort of successful thing at the end. It means I'm just staying curious, and I just, I'm not necessarily following the other sheep. I'm going to try and figure things out, on my own, and then listen to really good counsel, collaborate together, and then kind of get to where I'm going. But yeah, stay curious. Put that on your computer, laptop, post-it thing.
Put it on the post-it
and
stick it to your laptop or your computer. No, I believe in staying curious. Like, curiosity killed the cat. That's one of those things where it took that cat 9 lives.
Yeah. Right.
Before it actually died. I mean, just digging a little deeper. It could be the drink that I'm drinking, but it's more about like continuously trying new things and looking at things from a different perspective and just being curious about why something is or how it happens or how it develops. 100% there with you on that.
I also just want to add one other thing, because I do think, especially for women, so important, and that is be okay with going up to someone, right?
Yeah.
And I'm saying this professionally fine, but also personally. It's also the thing I'd say, like dating. 50% of the time you go. Like, that's okay. Or even more. Don't put stats behind it. But being curious also allows you to reach out to people and say things or ask for things or connect in a way that you wouldn't before. And actually, at the same event that we met at, a young woman who just moved to New York. I won't say her name here. I don't have permission, but I think that she would appreciate that, the fact that I am in awe of her right now, and we've only had one conversation, and that is because she saw me speak. She got in touch with me after. She didn't introduce herself to me at all at the event. Got in touch with me via LinkedIn, which is always my instruction. After we set up a time to speak, it was like probably 3 weeks ago or something. So the day came, and because of my curiosity, I don't need to have an itinerary or schedule of things that we're talking to. I'm always trying to nurture my network, grow the network, keep it in the ecosystem. I actually had no idea this young woman had just moved to New York. She works for a very large consulting agency. She's brilliant. And she just wanted 30 minutes of my time to introduce herself, to say to me, this thing resonated with me that you said, on the panel. Like, I just wanted to talk to you about that. And I was so free and willing to give unsolicited and solicited advice. And, eventually as I was talking, I just said to her, I am so glad you did this. I don't think enough people are doing this still. And I know we're coming off of social currency, but there's analog currency too, which is that human to human connection. And I always tell people with their mentors, like, be kind of promiscuous with it. Just have a ton of mentors. Like, don't just
like
choose 2 or 3 of them. Like, oh my goodness, like, just go after it. I think it's really important. But actually, in that moment, I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope she asks me to be her mentor, because, like, I would totally do that, right?
Yes.
But it's only because this woman actually connected, and she's not asking for anything. She's not, it's not transactional. She's really doing what I was doing 17 years ago coming to New York, right?
Yeah, and
connecting.
I think that's important for people to note that, like, yes, social currency, it's about your network and how you're using it. And how you're sharing your connections with people to other people. But an important part of it is that relationship building and maintaining it.
That's right.
Because once you have that connection, how are you fostering it, right? Like having coffees, having events at night, inviting people to socialize. It's all about building, maintaining, and fostering that relationship, which is all the same thing. But you want to make sure that you're having those genuine connections with people, whether you're sliding in their messages or DMs, where you're establishing the relationship with a 30-minute conversation, but it's also maintaining it down the road. So continuously doing that. Because one of the things that I learned early on, one of my mentors, or like one of the people that I had on my board of directors, and a board of directors is just, I look at myself as a business, and I think everybody should look at themselves as a business. And you have a board of directors, people that you can go to that have nothing to do with your industry for the most part, but they are experienced individuals that can help answer questions and guide you in the right direction. You don't have to take the advice, but it's good to have people in your circle where you can bounce ideas off of that have already been there, done that. And so one of the best pieces of advice that I received was, hey, you have us, but don't just come to us when you have questions. Like, send us updates, like maybe like once a month on how you're doing, just in general, because we care. We don't just want to be like this little resource that you tap into only when you need something. Because we have great relationships, we also care. So like, send us a note once a month saying, hey, this is how I'm doing. How are you? Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And really what they're getting at is we're invested in you. Mm-hmm. Right? And so because we're invested in you professionally, that is always going to also mean personally as well. We're invested in, to your point, your brand, your business, what you are doing. And that investment isn't one to be taken lightly, because going back to my your time is your most valuable asset. Once you can understand that kind of like currency in your own life, you really understand what it means when you're wasting time on things, on relationships, on friendships, on inefficiencies. It becomes magnified in your life, and how you're showing up during those times of magnifications to then make these little tweaks, these little shifts, or these swinging pendulum changes in your life, really, they really matter. And I love that you have a board of directors that's for you, right?
Yes.
And also, I think it's so networking is one thing, nurture is a whole other thing, right? And nurturing doesn't necessarily, and that's why, the transactional part of relationships, when you can really understand what that means, it also means that it's not always going to be a two-way street. You may be asking more of at certain points, or vice versa. But the nurture part of it helps when you're actually going down the road of, okay, I'm asking 90% of the things from you right now, and I'm very aware of that. But I'm hoping the nurture part part of it really matters. And then also the nurture part of it just means, and frankly, I say that I, turn down clients all the time. I really want to work, and I want my team working with people and with teams where we can be impactful, but frankly, that I just like you. Like, I want to work with you. I want to invest somehow in this problem that we're solving together, but people invest in people.
Exactly. So we've come to the point where we have our speed round. This round is I ask a question and you give the first thing that comes to mind. It's not a lot of thought that goes into it on either end, but it's something good, quick, and efficient.
So do you set this up so that we definitely have a morning mimosa beverage type thing before we get to the speed round? Okay, I'll try and keep up with the speed here.
Yes. All right. So what gets you out of bed?
What gets me out of bed literally is working out.
Working out?
Yeah, I work out first thing in the morning.
All right. What is your favorite band?
Whoa, this is a good one.
Group.
Yeah. Oh, it has to be a band or group. It can't be a person. Okay,
it can be.
Okay, well, so
as long as it's music affiliated.
Yeah, sure. Nina Simmone.
Wow.
Yeah, Nina Simmone.
All right. Favorite drink?
My favorite drink. Okay, so my death row drink would definitely be a Tanqueray tonic.
All right. Death row.
Yeah.
Role model.
Oh, gosh. All right. Well, my role models are consistent, but I also, depending on the day. So today, right now, my role model is my brother, Chris Chadden. Yeah.
Luxury item.
Oh, that's not fair. Okay, listen. That's a speed. Okay, fine. So the latest luxury item. My dream or one that I own right now?
Whatever.
Am I really putting myself out here?
It's up to you.
Okay, well, so here's the thing. Because I spent so many years in luxury, and I understand the cost margin, the cost benefit of these things, I will say I don't have a specific luxury item, but I did just totally treat myself to Yves Saint Laurent crossbody because I'm very good at keeping purses for many, many years. And my last one was 10 years old and it was time. But my real luxury is seeing the world, for sure.
So travel.
It's travel.
All right. Favorite food?
Ooh. All right. So it's my mom's escabeche fish, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But we're Jamaican, right? So you can't just have one thing on the plate. So it's escabeche fish, curry goat. Those are my two favorite things. And then her fried chicken.
Nice.
Honor to my dad's his southern roots, for sure.
Okay. Favorite country to visit?
Oh, goodness. Okay. So, my most favorite country that I've visited, this one is a little tough. I would say for sure was Chile.
Okay.
Close second.
Yeah.
Close second, because it's fresh in my mind, for sure. Mexico City, which isn't a country, obviously, but Mexico City is amazing.
Okay. All right. Best way to give back?
Yeah. So, I will always say, if you can't give your time, give money to the things that you really care about.
Retirement place?
My retirement place? Well, I mean, currently it's in Paradise. So I have a new love. He's amazing, and he says New Jersey is his paradise. So I don't know if that's gonna be where we retire. But I've never thought about my retirement place. So I don't know. So I'm gonna think about where I am right now and what makes me really happy. And that is currently, New Jersey.
All right. Because you said earlier your love is your world, right?
Yeah.
All right. Cartoon.
Oh, okay. So, the Boondocks.
Ah, excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Drama.
Drama, TV drama.
Whatever.
Oh, I mean, look, I'm The Wire, hands down, will
The Wire.
always be like the best written show, followed very closely by Breaking Bad.
All right. Comedy.
Oh, okay. So, Richard Pryor, anything.
Good pick. What is happiness?
Yeah, happiness. I think that's pretty simple for me. Anyway, happiness is following my intuition. Mostly, it is really following my intuition, acting from my intuition, believing my intuition, trusting my intuition.
Fair. Is there anything that you would like the listeners to know?
Oh, gosh, that is such an open-ended and deep question. Yeah, I would probably just say the only other thing that I would put out there for everyone to know, or to hear more than anything, is that self-investment isn't always just about self-improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Self-investment also means being self-accepting.
Say that again for them. Like that's really good. Say it again.
Yeah. So self-investment isn't always about self-improvement. Self-investment is also about self-acceptance. And you will move through this world so much easier and in a space that is quite untouchable if you can continue to get to that place or get to that place. By the way, you fall in and out of that place, but that's how it should be because we are human. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, Miss Taitt, thank you for being on the show. This was tons of fun. I'm really proud of this drink that I made here.
Yeah, it's
really refreshing.
So good.
It's great. Don't forget to follow Simmone on IG, not IG because that's private, but LinkedIn.
I'm just Simmone Taitt. Simmone with 2 M's and Taitt, Taitt on LinkedIn. And if you want to get in touch or check out Heartspace, it's heartspaceny.com. And I'm also just at info@heartspaceny.com.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to our sponsor for Season 2, Punto Space. The contemporary raw space combines capacity with intimacy. 4 distinct spaces on 3 levels encompass more than 3,500 square feet. Custom configurations, a state-of-the-art audio-visual system, and full-service support provide endless possibilities for realizing your creative vision. Thank you for joining the conversation. To learn more about Currency Shift, go to currencyshiftnow.com. If you feel as though you fit the criteria as the first, the only, or the disruptive, send us an email, info@currencyshiftnow.com. Until